Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to be good? Not good in the way people talk about goodness. Not the version you put on social media or mention at dinner parties. The other kind. The kind where you're constantly monitoring yourself, checking your intentions, making sure you're not taking up too much space, not asking for too much, not being too much. There's this quiet weight that comes with trying to be a good person. A steady hum of self-awareness that never quite turns off. You're watching yourself in real time, narrating your own behavior, wondering if you're doing it right, if you're being fair, if you're being kind, if you're being selfless enough. You do this in every interaction. At work, when you hold back your idea because someone else seems excited to share theirs. At home, when you say you're fine even though you're not. With friends, when you agree to plans you don't want to make because saying no feels cruel. You've turned yourself into a constant auditor of your own decency, and the audit never ends. And somewhere underneath all that watching, there's a question you don't ask out loud. What if being good is actually making you smaller? What if all this careful restraint, all this thoughtful consideration, all this stepping back so others can step forward, what if it's not virtue at all? What if it's something else entirely? Something you've dressed up in the language of morality because the truth is too uncomfortable to name? You don't say this to anyone. You barely admit it to yourself. But late at night, when you're alone with your thoughts, you feel it. The resentment, the frustration, the quiet anger at all the times you said yes when you meant no. All the times you made yourself convenient. All the times you apologized for wanting something, and then you feel guilty for feeling angry. Because good people don't think like this, do they? Good people don't keep score. Good people don't feel bitter about their own generosity. Good people don't secretly resent the very people they claim to care about. So you push the feelings down. You tell yourself you're tired, that you're being selfish, that everyone struggles sometimes and you're not special. But the feelings don't go away. They just sit there underneath everything else. Quiet, patient, waiting. She sits in the meeting, listening to her colleague take credit for an idea she shared with him 3 weeks ago. Not directly. He's too smart for that. He frames it as building on some thoughts we've been discussing as a team, and he glances at her when he says it, briefly, almost apologetically, as if that acknowledgement is enough. She doesn't correct him. She tells herself it's not worth it, that it would seem petty, that the work matters more than who gets credit. That making him look bad in front of everyone would be unkind, and she's not that kind of person. So she nods. She even adds a supportive comment that reinforces his point, because that's what good teammates do. They lift others up. They don't make things awkward. They don't center themselves. After the meeting, he thanks her in the hallway. "Appreciate you being such a team player," he says. And she smiles and says, "Of course." But in her car, on the drive home, she replays the meeting in her head. Every moment she stayed quiet. Every opportunity she had to speak up. And she's angry. Not just at him, at herself, for choosing to be small when she could have been clear. But then the anger turns inward, because wanting credit feels selfish, and making a scene would have been worse, wouldn't it? Here's what's really happening. She's not being a good person, she's being a safe person. There's a difference. Goodness, real goodness, doesn't require you to disappear. But safety does. Safety means never making anyone uncomfortable, never asserting yourself too much, never reminding people that you have needs, boundaries, opinions that might conflict with theirs. You've learned to call this goodness because it sounds better. Because I'm a good person feels noble. But I'm afraid of being disliked feels weak. So you wrap your fear in virtue and call it kindness. And the cruel irony is this: the more you do it, the less people respect you. Not because they're bad people, but because they sense on some level that you don't respect yourself, that you're negotiable, that your boundaries are suggestions, not requirements. So they take what you offer, not maliciously, just naturally, because you've trained them to. He's been with his partner for 6 years, and for 6 years he's been the reasonable one, the understanding one, the one who compromises. When she's tired, he handles everything. When she's stressed, he absorbs her frustration without complaint. When they fight, he's the first to apologize, even when he's not sure he's wrong. Because he doesn't want to be the kind of person who digs in, who makes things worse, who prioritizes being right over being connected. He tells himself, this is love. That relationships are about sacrifice, about putting the other person first, about being secure enough to let things go. But lately, something's shifted. She makes plans without asking him. She cancels on him last minute. She talks over him when they're with friends. Small things, nothing worth mentioning, but they accumulate. And underneath his understanding, underneath his patience, there's a growing sense of something he doesn't want to name. Invisibility. Last week, they were at dinner with another couple. He started telling a story, something funny that happened at work, and she interrupted him halfway through to share her own story. He stopped talking, smiled, listened to her instead. And nobody noticed, not even her. Later, in the car, he almost said something. The words were right there. But then he looked at her, tired from a long week, scrolling through her phone, and he let it go. Because what's the point? It's just a story. It doesn't matter. He's not that fragile. Except it does matter. And he is that fragile. He just doesn't want to be. He wonders sometimes what would happen if he stopped being so accommodating, if he said no without explaining himself, if he let her be disappointed, if he stopped managing her emotions and just focused on his own. But then he imagines the look on her face, the hurt, the confusion, the inevitable question, why are you being like this? And he knows he won't do it, because that's not who he is. What if it's not about being good? What if it's about being needed? What if the real reason you make yourself small is because it gives you something to hold on to? A role, a purpose, a way to be loved that doesn't require you to risk being rejected for who you actually are. What if your goodness is just a hiding place? There's a reason this pattern exists. When you're young, you learn quickly that certain versions of yourself are acceptable and certain versions aren't. The version that's agreeable gets rewarded. The version that's demanding gets punished. So you adapt. You become the person who doesn't cause problems, who doesn't need too much, who doesn't make people work too hard to love you. And it works. For a while, people like you, they rely on you. They tell you how thoughtful you are, how easy you are to be around, how lucky they are to have you in their life. But what they're really saying is, you're easy to manage. You don't require much. You won't push back. And over time, you start to believe that this is what makes you valuable. Your ability to mold yourself to what others need. Your willingness to set yourself aside. Your commitment to not being a burden. You tell yourself it's character. That you're just naturally giving. That some people are takers and some people are givers. And you're proud to be a giver. It makes you feel morally superior in a quiet way. More evolved. More mature. More enlightened than all those selfish people who prioritize themselves. But underneath the narrative, there's a different truth. You're not giving because you're generous. You're giving because you're afraid. Afraid of being too much. Afraid of being rejected. Afraid that if you stop performing this version of yourself, people will finally see what you've always suspected, that you're not actually worth the effort. So you make yourself worth it by being easy, by being low maintenance, by never asking for anything that might require someone to stretch for you the way you stretch for them. But here's the thing no one tells you. That version of you, the endlessly accommodating, always understanding, perpetually selfless version isn't actually good. It's just convenient. Convenient for everyone except you. Because underneath all that restraint, you're accumulating a debt. A quiet ledger of all the times you said yes when you meant no. All the times you prioritized someone else's comfort over your own clarity. All the times you performed goodness instead of living honestly. And eventually the debt comes due. Not in an explosion. Not in a breakdown. But in a slow, creeping resentment that poisons everything it touches. You start keeping score. You start noticing all the ways people don't reciprocate. You start feeling bitter about the very things you chose to give freely. You notice how often people come to you when they need something, but somehow they're unavailable when you need them. How your boundaries are optional but theirs are sacred. How your time is negotiable but theirs isn't. How your feelings are complicated but theirs are valid. And the worst part? You can't even blame them. Because you taught them to treat you this way. You showed them, through years of accommodating behavior, that your needs come second. That you'll always make room for them, even when they don't make room for you. So the anger turns inward, and then you feel guilty for feeling bitter, because good people don't keep score, do they? She's alone in her apartment on a Friday night. She'd made plans with a friend, but the friend canceled. Again, last minute, again. With an apologetic text that somehow felt more obligatory than sincere. And instead of feeling disappointed, She feels something else. Relief. She doesn't have to perform tonight. Doesn't have to be engaged. Doesn't have to monitor her face to make sure she looks interested. Doesn't have to ask the right questions or give the supportive responses or pretend she's not tired. She can just be. And in that moment, sitting alone on her couch with a glass of wine and nothing to prove, she realizes something uncomfortable. She's not actually a good person. She's an exhausted person pretending to be a good person. The goodness isn't real. It's a performance, a carefully maintained image, a way to control how people see her. Because if they saw the real her, the one who's sometimes selfish, sometimes petty, sometimes resentful, sometimes just deeply, deeply tired, they might not like her. And that terrifies her more than anything. So she keeps performing, because at least when she's performing, she knows what role to play. Here's the truth underneath the performance. Being a good person doesn't mean being a convenient person. It doesn't mean making yourself easy to love by becoming what everyone needs. It doesn't mean sacrificing your clarity for someone else's comfort. Real goodness requires boundaries. Real goodness requires honesty. Real goodness requires you to stop performing virtue and start living with integrity. And integrity is uncomfortable. It means saying no sometimes. It means disappointing people. It means acknowledging that your needs matter just as much as anyone else's, even when that feels selfish, even when people would prefer you to stay small. The paradox is this: you cannot actually be good if you're always trying to be good. Because trying to be good is about control. It's about managing perception. It's about earning love through performance rather than risking rejection by being real. And you cannot control how people see you. You can only control whether you're being honest. So maybe the question isn't, am I being a good person? Maybe the question is, am I being a real person? Because goodness without realness is just compliance. And compliance, no matter how well-intentioned, eventually becomes resentment. You can't give from an empty place. You can't love people authentically while hiding yourself. You can't build real relationships on a foundation of performance. At some point, you have to stop auditioning for approval and start showing up as yourself. Messy, imperfect, sometimes selfish, sometimes difficult but honest. Actually honest. And yes, some people won't like it. Some people benefited from your smallness. Some people preferred you when you were easy to manage. But those aren't your people. Your people are the ones who don't need you to be good. They just need you to be real. Maybe being a good person isn't about being selfless. Maybe it's about being self-aware enough to know when you're hiding behind virtue. Brave enough to acknowledge your limits. Honest enough to admit that sometimes you're not being kind, you're being scared. And scared is okay. Scared is human. But scared pretending to be virtuous? That's where the trouble starts. You don't have to be good all the time. You don't have to be understanding all the time. You don't have to be accommodating all the time. You just have to be honest. And sometimes, being honest looks like selfishness to people who benefited from your silence. Sometimes, being honest looks like cruelty to people who preferred you when you were small. Sometimes, being honest means disappointing people you care about. But here's what else it means. It means living in a way that doesn't require you to betray yourself. It means building relationships where people know you, not just a carefully curated version of you. It means discovering that real connection doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being present, and presence requires space. Space to be wrong sometimes, space to be difficult sometimes, space to prioritize yourself without apologizing for it. The people who matter will adjust. They might be surprised at first. They might push back. They might ask what's changed. But if they're your people, they'll make room for the real you. And if they don't, that tells you something important too. Not everyone deserves access to all of you. Not everyone has earned the right to your constant accommodation, and that's not cruelty. That's just clarity. So maybe the real work isn't becoming a better person. Maybe it's becoming a more honest one, and maybe that's been the point all along.